Hello, good morning, and a very warm welcome to Thinking Out Loud at HOK. Just to say, this is our first year anniversary for our Thought Leadership series, and to celebrate, we have red roses for all of you to take away, and given it's Valentine's Day tomorrow as well, it's just a thank you from all of us here in the studio for being so supportive. It's fantastic, as always, to see so many friendly faces, lots of clients, collaborators, acquaintances in the audience. My name is Farah, and I'm the marketing principal for HOK's London studio. And so to our speaker this morning. Born and bred in Sardinia, as a child, Fran spent many hours playing at her grandfather's forbidden studio, a wonderland of tracing paper, set squares, and coloured pencils, which Fran was actually meant to stay away from. Her grandfather was, in fact, a geometra, a man who dealt with geometry, as the name suggests, a hybrid, an architect, a building engineer, and a surveyor. Although he retired before Fran could truly comprehend the nature of his job, she believes it was him who instilled in her a fascination for the idea of creating through a balanced blend of artistic flair and technical knowledge. Years after, this led Fran to study building engineering and architecture at the University of Cagliari to explore both sides in equal depth. As part of her master's in urban design at the Bartlett, Fran wrote her thesis on nocturnal atmospheres, and this explored the emerging theme of cities at night. Fran's thesis was interpreting cities as a state where they were often competing interests by all those who live, work, and play in a city. Over the last 10 years, Fran has worked in both architecture and urban design on projects of differing scales, including a special needs school with children diagnosed with autism here in London, a regeneration project in Milan, and large-scale master planning in the Middle East. Joining HOK 5 years ago as an urban designer, Fran has developed a reputation of designing and delivering projects which span the globe. Her specialisms include sustainable urban design, focusing on community and local needs. Her passion is also understanding the needs of different cultures and how we adapt as designers. Outside of work, Fran loves to travel, as she is curious. She loves to eat exquisite food, of course, as she is Italian, and enjoys reading and adores being able to immerse herself in the multifaceted cosmopolitan culture that London has to offer. And so, without further ado, I really am very happy to introduce the exceptionally talented, and if I may say, beautiful Francesca Pintus. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, Farah, and thank you all for being here today. I'm very pleased to see a good crowd here. I suspect this is partially due to the fact that I threatened to stop talking to some of you hadn't you shown up today. But jokes aside, light in the city, I think this is a subject that we can all relate to as professionals, but probably more importantly as human beings. So you will see that I have dealt with the subject in a slightly unusual way, but if you're still awake at the end of my monologue, probably this will trigger a lively discussion later on this morning. So thank you. Imagine an everyday urban scene. A lively pedestrian street with people strolling through shops or sitting down at a table, enjoying their coffee. Some kids run around, teenagers giggle, and old couples slowly make their way home, arm in arm. I bet none of you thought of this as a dark, gloomy scene. What you will have pictured is a brilliant day, with sunshine warming people's faces and casting light shadows through the foliage of trees. Alternatively, you will have thought of a nice evening, with warm lights illuminating the streetscape and the buildings defining it. What made this scene enjoyable in your mind are two things: people's activities on one hand, and a pleasant light, on the other hand. With no doubt, these two elements impact the quality of street life. In addition, they are also a clear indication of the vibe of a city as a whole. Neglect to ensure the presence of either people or light in the urban environment, and you will condemn it to fail. As an architect and urbanist, I realized that we often discuss the importance of light and its effect on people in architecture and interior spaces. Yet we probably don't talk enough about the impact of light or its deficiency on our cities and public realm. During the next half an hour, I will therefore focus on the merits and issues concerning both natural and artificial light at an urban and global level. We know instinctively that natural light is the mother of life. Daylight is vital for our physical health and mental well-being. As the indoor generation, spending almost 90% of our time indoors, we must be reminded that we should be exposed to natural sunlight for at least 10 to 15 minutes daily. Natural light triggers basic biological processes, such as the production of vitamin D, which keeps one's bones, teeth, and muscles healthy, and serotonin, the happy hormone, which boosts one's mood and helps one feel calm and focused. And around 80% of our sensory impressions are registered through our eyes. Light thus covers yet another fundamental role. It's an essential environmental input for us. Light is what makes ourselves and the world around us visible and lets us interact with other people. Light allows the creation of a collective dimension, and as such, I wonder, can we consider it as the first indispensable ingredient for the creation of a successful and happy urban environment? In a city, the fluctuation between light and shadow determines the liveliness of a space. It molds the character and pace of our public realm and influences our emotions and reactions to certain environments. Light will impact the flow of people through our streets, the amount of time and money spent in a square, the success or neglect of a pathway through a park. As lizards under the sun or fireflies in the night, we naturally follow and crave for light. Back in 1979, William White, an American urbanist, analyst, and people watcher, produced a study called The Social Life of Small Urban Spaces. In this study, among other things, White documented how people follow the sun throughout the day in New York's public realm. By doing so, White attempted for the first time to empirically quantify the value of sunlight in an open space. He observed how the sun exposure and flexibility of public areas are among those factors that make them successful, as people move from one bench to another or adjust loose chairs to better track the sun.
This is the plaza of the Seagram Building in New York. Late morning. With a time-lapse camera, we were testing a hypothesis. The sun, we were pretty sure, would be the chief factor in determining where people would sit or not sit. Now, just after 12, they begin to sit. Right where the sun is. I was enormously pleased. What a perfectly splendid correlation. People do like the sun. They so visibly like it, men as well as women, that we were pretty sure that sunlight would be a major factor, the major factor perhaps, in plaza use, and that a southern exposure would be almost a necessity. Sun is most important in nippy weather, when the rays make the difference between sitting comfortably or not sitting. What hurts most is not so much the absence of sun, but of light. If we can't get the sun directly, perhaps we can borrow it. The same new buildings that are cutting off the sun from some places are reflecting it into others. As a matter of fact, some of the city's pleasantest lighting effects are from this kind of bounce light, particularly in the late afternoon. The new City Court building reflects sun with such a wallop that in one receiving block, trees are growing much faster than they did before. This black brick building bounces a surprising amount of light. And guess where to? Paley Park. It's a very soft, pleasant light.
Chasing the sun has not gone out of fashion since then. Rjukan is a small town in Norway that has no sun whatsoever for 5 months a year due to the mountains that surround it. In 2013, the government spent the equivalent of £500,000 to install computer-driven mirrors that track the movement of the sun and reflect it back into Rjukan's civic heart, its town square. Interviewed by The Guardian, a local said that people of Rjukan are somewhat used to the shade. But being finally able to enjoy the sun, also in winter, feels not only physically, but also mentally warming. Incidentally, the first idea of installing a sun mirror in the town dates back to 1913. But bringing sunshine to the people did not prove possible at the time. So in 1928, a cable car was installed to transport people to the sunshine instead. And at very different latitudes in Arab and Middle Eastern countries, sun is generally something to seek shelter from. At times, though, this inevitably translates into a merciless lack of natural light in the urban environment. This is why in Cairo, Egypt, local researchers studied corrugated panels to be installed on the upper side of building facades. The aim was to reflect sunlight down into the typical narrow streets of the old city or informal settlements where 60% of people in Cairo live. These panels were intended to increase living conditions while preserving the authenticity of the site, boosting its cultural value and historical significance. And when tested, these panels proved to increase illumination by 200% in autumn and 400% in winter. However, the cost per square meter was estimated at $70 to $100, which is simply too much for the inhabitants of these areas. And this brings me to my next point. Light in the city should be a right, not a privilege. It's Le Corbusier who said that the history of architecture is the history of the struggle for light. One person's breathtaking view from a penthouse is somebody else's irreversible shadow. Development pressure on cities, chronic lack of space, and merely profit-driven strategies over time turn natural light in the city into a commodity. Worldwide, alarm bells rang a long time ago, and the necessity of protecting light as a public good is an old, yet as relevant as ever, subject of discussion. At the beginning of the 20th century, a Boston architect named William Atkinson started to study how buildings' orientation, shape, and height affected natural light in the street. Interestingly, he had begun to study natural light in relation to hospitals in a very precocious concept of holistic healing process. He then realized that bringing sunlight to the public space in the first place might have helped in solving at least some health-related issues at their source. Inspired by Atkinson's work, in 1916, New York City published a zoning ordinance that guaranteed minimum standards of natural light and air at street level. The notorious New York progressive setbacks that shaped landmarks such as the Empire State Building are in fact based on a set amount of sky that people have the right to see from the center of the road. And in the 80s, the city of San Francisco commissioned a study to explore the impact of tall buildings on the quality of its urban environment. The study was based on a simple assumption. Sun and light access in open spaces between 10 a.m. and 2 p.m. is critical for a healthy and active use of the city. So for each single public space, the study then determined the shape and height of the largest possible building that in this time frame wouldn't cast a shadow on the adjacent public realm. Closer to us, in 2018, the City of London published a planning advice note to protect its small and extremely valuable sunlit open spaces, considered as a key element for the city to be vibrant and popular. However, constrained by higher powers, the ambitions of the City of London were way more modest than San Francisco. The city settled on at least 2 hours of sun over at least half of each open space on the 21st of March. In an area dominated by businessmen who can only afford quick lunch breaks, this is considered sufficient for people to enjoy their outdoor time. Despite these examples, there are plenty of cases where light protection measures are completely missing, or where, as the Washington Post put it, there is a revival of a long simmering urban tension between light and growth, between the benefits of city living and its cost in shadows. A typical example is New York's so-called Billionaire's Row, where a series of super slim, super tall towers are casting immense shadows on the south side of Central Park. Quoting the Washington Post again, these towers are a stark reminder that the new growth needed in healthy cities can come at the expense of people already living there. In some ways, shadows turn light into another medium of inequality, a resource that can be bought by the wealthy, eclipsed from the poor. Enjoyment of the park while actually in the park, and notably free activity in a high-cost city, will be dimmed a little to give millionaires and billionaires views of it from above. Unfortunately, the relationships between inequality and light don't end at sunset. After incandescent lamps became commercially available, artificial illumination extended the day into the evening. And today, we're so dependent on electric light that we notice it only when it's not working properly or it's missing altogether. However, this is not the case for everyone. You might remember the story of Daniel, a 9-year-old homeless boy from the Philippines who was photographed in 2015 while doing his homework on the pavement, catching the dim light of a McDonald's window nearby. A similar story about Victor, a 12-year-old boy living in Peru, went viral just last summer. Daniel and Victor are among the 900 million people worldwide that today do not have access to artificial light. A world map of the Earth at night, published by NASA, reveals the disparity of electric light distribution between developed and developing countries. This map tells the story of reduced social and cultural development opportunities, limited life standards, and poor safety and security conditions. Development opportunities, life standards, safety, and security. Whether we notice or not, these are the elements that artificial light affects in our daily life on a daily basis and in the long run. And allow me to pause on the last notions, safety and security. Because even in developed countries, feeling safe and secure at night is in itself a privilege. People with sensory or neurological disorders might find navigating at night incredibly challenging. My friend Matteo, 35, has a genetic incurable disease which is called pigmentosa retinitis, which means that especially at night, his peripheral sight is extremely limited. If walking around by himself when spaces are not lit properly, he's in continuous danger of hurting himself. And most men would never consider that a simple act like walking around the city could be or be perceived as dangerous. Yet last year, a YouGov real-time survey revealed that the majority of British women have felt unsafe just by doing that. Almost half of the interviewed women said that they always or often feel unsafe when walking alone at night. By contrast, only 10% of men feel the same. Low levels of perceived safety and security by women and vulnerable people highly affect their daily lives. It limits their freedom of movement, influences their participation in outdoor activities, and their comfort in using social amenities like public transport at night. In an attempt to make our public realm accessible and welcoming to everyone and at all times, it is imperative that our cities take appropriate measures to firstly understand the challenge and secondly improve the quality rather than the quantity of lighting. After all, lighting is power. Power to enhance our perception of the urban environment and to positively alter social dynamics. Urban sociologists remark how light can help reduce social and economic gaps and support integration policies. In fact, improving lighting in an urban area sends a positive message about the community investment in the area, which in turn increases community pride, social cohesion, and informal social control. In other words, inhabitants feel that authorities care about their neighborhood, which will positively change their own image of the area as well as their own behavior. Sometimes, positive results can also be reached through less orthodox, more spontaneous initiatives. It's the case of guerrilla lighting. In derelict areas of the city, flash mobs completely transformed unkept spaces through the use of portable lighting devices within the span of 5 to 10 minutes. By showing with little effort a different side of these spaces, light gives them a second chance, a glimpse of potential future opportunities and reconnection with the urban scene. Through structured lighting master plans, special events, and small spontaneous activities alike, cities are giving shape to a large-scale urban picture, which is made up of a dotted calibration of tangible interventions. As such, cities are more or less consciously attempting to reach a happy intersection between the so-called social lighting, lighting for people, and beautification lighting, lighting for pure amusement. After all, we live in a time of global competition, where cities contend for the top positions of public appreciation. Cities have to be livable for their inhabitants and equally attractive for visitors and city users. Urban hubs are challenged to reinvent themselves, prolonging the time that people spend in the city. If cities wish to establish a strong nocturnal identity to remain competitive, the city's nighttime personality must be as charming and striking as its daytime character. We're therefore witnessing a shift from a profit-making only attitude towards a holistic nighttime economy. Cities at night dress up not only to look good and make money, but also to enhance their social and cultural offer. Take a walk through London at night. Move along the glorious Regent Street with its austere facades. Visit the Science Museum during one of its late openings. Stroll along the crisp riverfront with the colorful bridges of the Illuminated River Project. Have a beer or two in Camden Town late-night bars. Employing 1.6 million people and contributing billions to its own economy, London at night is on. In London, Rome, New York, and all other 24/7 capitals, along this long and often complex path towards urban self-redefinition, light in the city plays a vital role. Light is a key, powerful, and delicate urban design tool that transforms, exalts, and sometimes corrects architectural and urban forms. Through the use of theatrical, scenic compositions, the city highlights and hides different elements of the urban environment, temporarily letting us forget about ugly, inconvenient truths and enchanting us with sparkling and solemn beauty. Within the global topic, trend, and challenge of urban lighting, some cities are taking the lead, each with their own unique perspective. Luci means light in Italian, but it also stands for Lighting Urban Community International, a network that connects 70 cities around the world which all believe light is a powerful tool to improve developing a city in social, cultural, and economic terms. Within this network, the various ways different cities approach the subject and set their own priorities provide interesting practical examples of what we discussed this morning. Dakar in Senegal and Bharatpur in Nepal are working hard towards improving their public lighting network in an attempt to enhance living conditions and opportunities for their inhabitants. Yala in Thailand is focusing on safe public spaces for citizens to interact and carry out activities together, leading to improved social cohesion in a city that often undergoes political and religious turmoil. Glasgow sees an innovative use of light as a key catalyst to regenerate the city and transform its image. The city is taking a participatory approach in an attempt to reactivate its public realm, changing the public perception towards and engagement with its open spaces. Oulu in northern Finland faces long and dark winters, during which the population serotonin levels inevitably drop. However, the city decided to turn its Arctic scene into an opportunity, seeing it as a unique environment for urban light art and light planning. Since 2010, Oulu has been investing in a city-wide lighting master plan and a yearly festival called Lumo, with the aim to, quote, bring light and joy to the people during the darkest of times. And finally, to close the circle on urban light today, I feel obliged to pay tribute to the ultimate city of light, which is obviously Paris. In the 17th century, La Ville Lumière was the first city in the world to use public lighting as a means to increase public safety and security. Lanterns were placed on almost every main street, and residents were asked to place candles and oil lamps on their windowsills to prevent crime and encourage people to walk around the city after sunset. In the 19th century, Haussmann oversaw the installation of approximately 20,000 gas lights throughout the city, his slogan being allegedly, light before anything else. And today, Paris takes great pride and invests a considerable amount of money in setting up its night scene. It counts almost 175,000 public lighting points, which light up over 300 city sites and 33 out of its 37 bridges. The city is implementing a light map, which progressively replaces existing systems with more energy efficient and sustainable measures, and balances illumination throughout the city in favor of local amenities and neighborhoods mainly located in outlying districts. And as the sun rises again, Paris takes good care of its natural light too. The relationship between its street's width and building heights has been governed for over a century by geometric rules that allow for an abundance of light and air throughout its public realm. And as such, in a continuous cycle between day and night, light fills the city's urban gaps with life. Thank you. So well done, you're still awake. I don't know if there are any questions from the audience.
Hi, that was great, thank you. I was just wondering about light fixtures and light pollution. You always hear about, the reflection up or the fact that, birds in the park need to sleep even though we need to go out. So just some comments on that?
Sure. Light pollution is definitely a big theme today. I read something interesting recently. In the 90s, when LA went through those terrific earthquake, apparently people rushed to call the authorities because they were panicking because they saw something in the sky they weren't quite sure as to what it is. And it was the first time they were seeing the Milky Way. So this gives you a bit of an understanding of the nature and quantity of light pollution in the city. It's definitely something we need to take into account. I have to say technology is there, so there are definitely measures to take care of the issue. Sustainability is definitely important, but what I was trying to focus on in this talk is not only the environmental side of sustainability, but also the social and economic side of it, which I believe light is a big component of.
Thank you. Actually, my question was on light pollution as well. Going back to your slide on the map of the world, pinpointing those capitals that consider it an issue, and Iceland was on there. Reykjavik, some time ago, and I don't know if they still do, have this policy of switching the lights out at night once a week or once a month for half an hour or so, which gives the residents an opportunity to see what's up there. Is that something that is a policy you think that's got place elsewhere in Europe and other places?
Absolutely. I think a sensitive thing to do would be to dim lights progressively throughout the night as activities sort of fade off. You don't need your whole city to be, up all night for no reason if nobody's there to enjoy it and to see it. So definitely that's something that we should keep into account. Also because I believe today about 20% of our energy consumption worldwide is due to electric light. So if we can optimize that, we all have something to gather from it.
In my household, LED lights are forbidden because they're causing my partner extreme headaches. And to my own experience in urban settings, this new generation of lighting is sort of an atmosphere killer. That may be a personal experience. I don't know, is there any scientific background or debate about this new generation of light sources?
Well, that's probably a question more for the lighting designers who are in the room today. I believe technology, as I said, is there. So there is a public recognition of the issue. For a long time, there was a bit of a accepting of the fact that we had to lead up cities, and in order to do that, we had to accept that the quality of lighting wasn't that great. I think now technology is catching up, so definitely there is the chance to provide nice atmospheres, still being respectful of the environment.
Thanks very much. The case study you mentioned of New York Central Park I thought was very interesting. And it does, I think, throw up quite a few contrasts in an urban environment, which I'm sure you're aware of. And that is, on the one hand, and with no disrespect to developers in the room, developers are interested in maximising plot space and optimising their saleability of the units that they're then developing, versus the local authorities who in turn are trying to protect rights to light, rights to sunlight. A very one-sided debate in favour largely of developers, I would say. Any thoughts on how local authorities could try and encourage developers to be a little bit more concerned about legacy, sustainability, as you say, and rights to sunlight and daylight? Thank you.
I think one of the issues is that today we talk about right to light only in the private sphere, meaning we just complain when our own bedroom or living room is overshadowed, and we never really talk about light as a public good. Interestingly, going back to New York, there is a non-profit organization there called Environmental Simulation Center. And what they did was to track down all the shadows of the city, in particular those projected onto public spaces, and trying to propose to the city a new so-called sunshine zoning government, meaning making the city accept the maximum level of shadows that they would allow in a public space, and then governing planning and zoning accordingly. And as we know, the city has not adopted this idea, but this has triggered in New York a lot of debate about this subject. And I think in a city like London, where I believe we have 500 more towers planned or under construction over the next 10 years, this is something that we definitely need to talk about. It cannot all be about money.
Yeah, I think it was a really, really interesting talk. I really enjoyed it. As not necessarily a lighting specialist, I think for me it was quite revealing with regards to a number of topics that I've not really thought about. I mean, I live in London and I travel in through West London on a regular basis, and I see the Paddington Basin growing hand over fist, and it's quite remarkable when you look at the new development there, the number of buildings that are going up and the height that they're going up. And my thoughts are very much around what impact that has on the local community, if there is one in that area. Firstly, there's a playoff between the economic elements, meaning, the developers will build when it's economically viable. but I just wonder how powerful the community is locally in order to dictate what the outcome of that is going to be and the impact that has on their social spaces. Because it looks to me like it's turning into a section of Tokyo down there. Not that there's anything wrong with that, but there's no gaps between buildings. There doesn't seem to be any social spaces. There are still schools in the area and there are still hospitals in the area, so there's a lot of low-paid workers that need to live and work and travel and exist in that part of London. So I find it quite shocking what's going on there. So I think it seems to me that there needs to be more control. I'm worried that the developers and the economic element and the profitability of these developments are taking over, and I'm concerned that the social impact might be quite serious over time.
I think as a project manager, the first thing I always do is kind of really work with the clients and the other stakeholders to put a really detailed brief together. And I think it's important to remember that that brief has to cover sustainability and the kind of social interactions, the social impacts of buildings, as well as the how many square meters or how many linear meters of space you need. So I think it's important to think really broadly. And I'm very aware of the social impacts of what I do. I act for the church commissioners and for David Sainsbury's charities and people like that. And I think we just need to take the blinkers off and actually understand the context of what we're doing. So for me to think about the quality of the spaces that the architects that I work with create is really, really important. And to be able to come along today and just over breakfast, just think about some of those wider implications, just kind of take a moment to actually dwell on the legacy that we leave with the work that we do is really important. One of the things that we forget is that we should actually achieve more than the minimum standards. So I think that we actually have to delight with what we do and actually really, really shoot for the stars. I've got a project we're just finishing at the moment, and we're kind of making sure we've dealt with all of the things we have to do, so building regulations, the standards, the planning conditions, and then I've had to remind the team actually just to look up and actually go that extra mile to do something really wonderful. So having come to several of these, I really just wanted to congratulate FARA and HOK and the rest of the team for just the most wonderful series of lectures. Thank you so much.
I actually studied with Francesca at UCL. We did our Masters in Urban Design together. And it's very interesting to see that her interest in light has remained continuous since that moment, like about, let's say 10 years back, that she's remained interested in light. And for me personally, I think the thing that resonates the most about urban places is the people. So it was very interesting to see her bring the aspect of light in, which is something that is seldom thought about. We take it for granted. And especially from the context that I come in India, for example, there's an abundance of light. So you take these things for granted. So when she was talking about it from a European and a different context perspective, it was very enlightening. It was very eye-opening as well. And there was a lot of research that has gone in, and it came through because she wasn't giving everything away, and I think that was the most interesting thing. She was teasing the questions from the audience, and the audience asked the right questions, and she had the right answers, and I think that was the best part. Everybody understands the importance of light, but you don't understand why it's important, and I think answering that why question was the most important thing, and she brought out some very, very interesting facts and figures that supported this argument. And I think a lot of people it was a very mixed audience, so I think everybody, all the professions are going to go back with independent ideas about how life is going to impact their profession. And I think at the end of it, that's the goal with these kind of talks.